I own a small business with 7 employees. We make cookies, but not just any cookies. We make sugar-free cookies that diabetics can eat. Actually, they're so tasty, anyone can enjoy them. That was the inspiration that motivated me to start this business. You see, I'm a diabetic myself. I have been one my whole life. If you think running a cookie company is fun and games, think again. I work 100 hours a week, which isn't unusual for small business owners. I make a nice living, but I'm not in it for the money. I love what I do. I'd better. My margins are very tight, around 1%. That means I have to sell $1 million worth of cookies to make $10,000. Every penny counts, literally. That's why I get so frustrated with government regulations. Now let me be clear. Some regulations are necessary, especially for obvious reasons in the food industry. But necessary and excessive are two entirely different things. Excessive, unnecessary regulations soak up valuable hours of my time and my money for no good purpose. That 100 hours I work per week, I estimate 36 of them are spent on compliance issues alone. This keeps me away from activities that would help me grow my business, like sales and product development, and that keeps me away from hiring more people. My employees are like family to me. It's that way with most small businesses, but it's a struggle every single day. I could be more productive and feel a lot less anxiety if I didn't have to fight my own government. Or should I say governments, federal, state, and local. I get the roads and the bridges and the national defense, but I don't get why they have to be involved in every tiny aspect of my business, sometimes competing with each other as to who can make my life more difficult. For example, as a bakery, I'm under the jurisdiction of the Food and Drug Administration, FDA, the Department of Agriculture, and the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. I also have to deal with the State Health Agency. They all have different rules. If these rules contradict one another, it's not their problem, it's mine. A few years ago, the FDA inspector showed up for one of his random inspections. He noticed the door to the area in which we bake our cookies swung out as you walked in. He told me that was a code violation. The doors have to swing in. I had 30 days to fix it or I'd be fined thousands of dollars. I should note we have an air curtain between both rooms, so no food particles can get in or out of the baking area. I pointed this out. The inspector was unmoved. A few months later, the inspector from the Ag Department shows up for one of his random inspections. He notices that the door swings in. Yes, I tell him, it does. It's an FDA regulation. No, he tells me, it has to swing out. Fix it within 30 days, he says, or you'll be fined. I started keeping 2 sets of doors, one that swings in for the FDA and one that swings out for the Ag Department. Here's another example. The FDA requires bakeries to send a sample of every product batch to a third-party lab for testing. We make 36 batches a day. That means we have to send 36 bags of cookies every day to that lab. This costs me tens of thousands of dollars every year. And remember, in order to make $10,000, I have to sell $1 million in cookies. We've never had a bad test. Hardly surprising, making cookies isn't that complex. The ingredients are well known and safe. I'm all for testing, but how about 1 bag out of every 10 batches? That alone might double my profit margin to 2%. One more example. The government demands that the type on my packaging be a certain size. Fine. I hired a company that does this sort of work to do the printing. The inspector gets out his magnifying glass and decides the font is off by 1/100th of an inch. All the packaging has to be trashed and a whole new set ordered. That cost me $15,000 or $1.5 million in cookies to make that money back. Another time, we didn't include the word coconut in the allergy section of the package. We didn't think it was necessary as these were coconut cookies. All that packaging had to be redone too. That cost me $68,000 or $6.8 million worth of cookies to make that money back. I could go on. So could anyone who owns a small business. But you get the idea. Small businesses are responsible for 60 million jobs. We could be responsible for a lot more if the politicians who pass these laws and the bureaucrats who enforce them would back off. Common sense regulation? I'm all for it. Excessive, unnecessary, wasteful regulation? I need to get back to work. I'm Joseph Semprevivo, president of Joseph's Light Cookies for Prager University.
Like the fair-minded progressive that I was, I thought a $15 minimum wage was an absolute good. Then I had a head-on collision with reality. It's a funny thing about reality. It just is. You can't wish it away. So here is my cautionary tale. For over 3 decades, I had a good job working as a server. I have worked in some amazing award-winning restaurants in Seattle. I enjoyed the work, met wonderful people, and I was making really good money. I wasn't making much per hour, that's true, but in my business, the magic is in tips. On a typical night, I would make on average $25 to $50 an hour. Believe me, I earned it. I took pride in my work. I wanted every dining experience to be a memorable one for my guests. I also loved my job for this reason. I had flexibility. I could plan my work schedule. That was very important to me because I had a growing son. It was a good life. Then, in 2015, the Seattle City Council raised the minimum wage from $9.47 to $15 an hour, a 58% hike. Great for the working stiff, right? Well, hang on, because here comes Mr. Reality. The business owner, the person who signs the checks, has to find a way to pay for this massive new expense. For Walmart or Microsoft or a large restaurant chain, this might not be a problem. For a local restaurant owner, it's a nightmare. Contrary to popular opinion, most restaurants don't have big profit margins. In fact, most are razor thin. Seattle restaurant owners, faced with this shock to their bottom line, raised prices, reworked their menus, and created new compensation models. Some did away with tips altogether, substituting a flat service charge as a way of navigating the climbing wage. That change in the tipping model caused a dent in my pocketbook. The rise in the wage did not cover the loss of tips. And, of course, they cut back on employee hours and support staff too. But for many establishments, none of these cost-saving measures worked. Restaurants, some that had been in business for decades, many family-owned, closed, including the ones I worked for. Good servers don't grow on trees, and I was able to score an interview at another amazing restaurant. Then, before I could even confirm the interview, that one closed too. Same reason. The $15 minimum wage cut their profits down to nothing. So let me add this up for you. I make a lot less money now than I did before Seattle decided to do what was supposedly in my best interest. I used to be able to pay my bills as they came due. Now it's a juggling act. I used to have enough money to support my son's extracurricular activities. Now I often just say no. Before the minimum wage increase, I had one job and worked 4 days a week. After the wage hike, I had 2 jobs and worked 6. With my skills and a tipping culture, I used to average 18 to 20% or more on any check. Now, instead of tips, I get a flat 14%, part of the 20% service charge the restaurant owner tacks on the bill. I still pride myself in providing good service, but the incentive to go the extra mile is gone. There is no way to maximize my income. And what's Seattle's answer to my problem? To raise the minimum wage again. The progressive idea is that you should be able to make a fair wage. But if you have no job or are working more for less, how is that fair? How is it fair to my friend who worked his way up from busboy to sommelier, the fancy name for the person who manages a restaurant's wine list? He lost his job when his restaurant closed due to the minimum wage increase. Or my former boss, who went from a cook to an owner and couldn't survive the double blow of the minimum wage law and the coronavirus. And it's not just a Seattle problem. In New York City, raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour pushed the restaurant industry into a recession. To stay afloat, 75% of owners reduced employee hours and 47% eliminated jobs. San Francisco is in the same boat. Mandating minimum wage laws might be a winner for progressive politicians and ivory tower economists, but it's a loser for those of us who have to live with the consequences. Unless fair-minded people speak out, those consequences only figure to get worse as more states, and maybe even the federal government, succumb to the false promise of raising the minimum wage. I'm Simone Barron with the Full Service Workers Alliance for Prager University.
The bigger the government, the better for women. Is that statement true or false? Well, if party affiliation is any indicator, most women under the age of 40 would say true. Young women, especially single women, are among the left's most loyal supporters. This isn't surprising, given that programs like government-subsidized childcare and government-mandated paid family leave sound like things that make life better for women. But do they really? Most European governments provide subsidies that allow women to stay home for months, even years, following the birth of a child. And some European countries require employers to offer female employees part-time and flexible work arrangements. So have European women benefited from these programs? The answer is no, unless you think lower wages, fewer jobs, and fewer management opportunities benefit women. Why is this the case? Because these supposedly women-friendly government mandates change the way businesses evaluate female employees. It encourages companies to assume that women will not only cost them more, but that they'll be less productive than men. Spain is a good example. In 1999, that country passed a law giving women with young children the right to work reduced hours. But a study by economists at the IE Business School in Madrid and at Queens College of the City University of New York found that women paid a big price in lost opportunities. Companies were less likely to hire women of childbearing age, less likely to promote them, and more likely to dismiss them compared with men. When Chile tried similar policies, similar outcomes resulted. In the words of Maria Prada, an economist for the Inter-American Development Bank, the purpose of the law was to help women participate in the labor force and achieve more work-family balance, and it's doing the opposite. A study of 22 countries by 2 Cornell economists showed that in countries with the most extensive benefits for women, women are more likely to be in dead-end jobs and less likely to become managers or top executives. This is because once the government mandates additional benefits for women, employers place them on the mommy track, meaning they assume women will want to work fewer hours, whether that's true or not. This might explain why, in the United States, where these benefits are not mandated, women account for more than 40% of senior managers, while in more progressive Europe, that number is a little over 30%. But big government doesn't throw obstacles only at women trying to get ahead. It throws obstacles at women struggling to get by. Here, we don't have to go to Europe to find examples. There are plenty in the United States. Take the issue of occupational licenses, government regulations requiring a license to pursue particular professions. Sure, people operating dangerous and complex equipment should have to get special training, take tests, and be licensed. But why are occupational licenses required for hair shampooers and braiders? In some states, licenses are even required for interior designers and florists. Getting licenses can require hundreds of hours of schooling and entail major fees. That's not about protecting consumers or public safety. That's a source of revenue for city and state governments and a way for some politically powerful lobby groups to keep out competition. And since more women obtain occupational licenses than men, women are disproportionately hurt. So what's the solution? Less government, not more. Since 2017, a combination of tax cuts and deregulation, meaning less government, have been a boon for women. Women's weekly median earnings have gone up by almost 5%. The unemployment rate for women has fallen to 3.4%, a historic low. And more women are starting businesses than ever before. Between 2017 and 2018, women started almost 2,000 businesses a day. Right now, there are an estimated 12.3 million women-owned businesses, a 6% increase since 2016. And here's the topper. Since 2017, more and more businesses have voluntarily offered family benefits to employees. Why? Because the more companies have to compete for workers, the more benefits workers receive. That's how the free market works, and the opposite of how big government works. The free market, it turns out, does a much better job at creating opportunities for women than big government does. This not only means better jobs and better pay for women, but also the chance to craft the lives they actually want. After all, not every woman needs or values a generous childcare package. But when the government mandates benefits, they become, in effect, taxes that every woman and man has to pay. The bigger the government, the better for women? You might want to rethink that one. I'm Carrie Lucas, president of Independent Women's Forum for Prager University.
Workers of the world, unite to protect your freedom. You have nothing to lose but your jobs, which is exactly what is happening in California and threatening to spread to the rest of the country. Just what we need, right? Fewer jobs and fewer people employed. Why is this happening? Exhibit A. Assembly Bill 5, or AB 5 as it's commonly known, passed by the California legislature in September of 2019. AB 5 was authored by a former union boss, Assemblywoman Lorena Gonzalez. The stated goal was to protect freelance workers from employers taking advantage of them. Instead, it has pushed thousands of these workers into the unemployment line. Here's why. Workers in the United States are classified as either employees or independent contractors, sometimes known as freelancers. Independent contractors are self-employed and contract their labor to one or more firms. The upsides to this arrangement are clear. Freelancers decide whom they work for, when, where, and how. They're their own boss. So then, what are employees? Employees typically work for one employer. In exchange, they're entitled to workplace benefits and protections that independent contractors are not, such as health care, time off, minimum wage, and unemployment insurance. We don't have to agree which kind of employment is better. Different people have different preferences. It's called choice. But some people, specifically unions and progressive politicians, are anti-choice. AB 5's author, Assemblywoman Gonzalez, disdains freelance work. These were never good jobs, she says. Oh, really? She might want to talk to some of the 2 million Californians or the 57 million Americans who freelance. 46% of those workers happen to be women. Of course, the AB 5 supporters would say the law is needed because companies, especially gig economy firms such as Uber and Lyft, willfully misclassify workers as freelancers to avoid providing benefits. Why not ask the workers themselves? Well, pollsters have. According to a McKinsey study, nearly 80% of gig workers say they're happier than those working traditional jobs. They love their freedom and also earn a good living. In fact, over 17 million freelancers quit their traditional job to freelance, and 2 out of 3 of them say they earn more now than before. For the majority, their new incomes outpace their previous salary within just 1 year. Half of the freelancers say they would not take a traditional job no matter how much they were offered. And in a survey of female gig workers, nearly 2 out of 3 women who have a side job prefer being independent contractors over being employees. AB 5 has already done damage. It has wiped out the livelihoods of many independent contractors and will limit new opportunities in the future. Freelance writers and journalists have been especially hurt. The law includes a provision making it illegal for them to produce more than 35 pieces of content in a year for a single company. Left-leaning Vox Media hailed the bill's passage as a victory for workers everywhere, then turned around and laid off 200 freelance writers rather than make them full-time employees. The rideshare industry estimates that AB 5 will increase their labor costs by 20 to 30%. As a result, rideshare companies may schedule drivers in advance and reduce the number of drivers during slow hours or in less busy markets. For customers, this means longer wait times, fewer available rides, and higher prices. For drivers, it means reduced flexibility and reduced income. It may also kill hundreds of thousands of jobs. From its inception, AB 5 was fundamentally flawed. Dozens of industries and trade groups lobbied for and won carve-outs before the bill was passed to ensure it didn't affect them. But special carve-outs are not the way to fix bad policy. That approach only rewards those who can afford to pay for special treatment and punishes those who can't. Legislative attempts to overturn AB 5 have failed. Not surprising given the influence the unions have over California politics. Court challenges have been filed and are ongoing, but legal action takes time, and hardships are immediate. This would all be bad enough if it were just a California problem. But New Jersey, New York, Illinois, Wisconsin, and Oregon are all considering AB 5-style legislation. Although AB 5 is positioned as progressive policy, there's nothing progressive about what it does. It's backward, not forward-looking. Flexibility, freedom, and opportunity is the bright future of the American worker, unless bad policies like AB 5 get in the way. I'm Patrice Onwuka, Senior Policy Analyst at the Independent Women's Forum for Prager University.
We're supposed to be the United States of America, but in many ways, we're now divided into two very different nations. There is Red State America and there's Blue State America. The red states favor conservative, small government, free market policies, low taxes, light regulation, tough on crime policing, and worker freedom. Think Florida, Texas, Tennessee, Arizona, and Utah. The blue states favor a liberal left, big government approach, high taxes, heavy regulations, high minimum wages, and mandatory union membership. Think New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Illinois, Oregon, and of course, California. Progressives like to argue that their big government, high tax policies are economically superior and thus better for the poor, minorities, and working class Americans than those of red states. Conservative policies, progressives contend, are culturally backward and tilted to benefit the rich. Let's test this thesis by comparing three of the largest red states, Florida, Texas, and Tennessee, with three of the largest blue states, California, New York, and Illinois. If progressive policies really work, then Americans should be rushing to get into the blue states. But just the opposite is happening. Americans are packing up their U-Hauls and heading to the red states. According to the New York Times in August 2020, so many people wanted to leave New York City that moving companies were turning away business. They just couldn't handle the demand. This exodus may be accelerating, but it's not new. Over the last decade, the three big blue states each lost an average of 1 million people to other states, while the three big red states gained almost 1 million from other states. Makes perfect sense. Americans like freedom. Small government means more freedom, and freedom means opportunity. Let's say you're looking for a job. Over the last decade, Florida, Texas, and Tennessee have gained twice as many jobs as the progressive states. Not only that, but your money goes further in red states. According to a 2019 Tax Foundation study, your $100 stretches to $111 in purchasing power in Tennessee, while in New Jersey it shrinks to $89. If you're a big corporation or a small company looking for a business-friendly environment, affordable housing, or maybe just a better quality of life, where are you going to go? The tough decision is not choosing a red state or a blue state. The tough decision is which red state to move to. Progressives like to say that this isn't about economics, it's about weather. The red states tend to be in the south and southwest where the weather is warmer. But that doesn't explain why so many people are leaving California, which has the best weather in the country. So what does explain the migration from blue states? Start with taxes. The two most populous blue states, California and New York, have the highest tax rates in America, while the two most populous red states, Texas and Florida, have no income tax at all. When taxes get too high, people move to where taxes are lower. The problem for the high tax states is that these people take their money, their ambition, and their employees with them. Then there is crime. Do blue cities do better than red cities? The answer, of course, is no. Of the 20 cities with the highest murder rates, 18 are run by left-leaning Democrats, and for the most part have been for decades. And these cities aren't getting safer, they're getting more dangerous. A good chunk of Minneapolis was burned to the ground as a result of riots following the death of George Floyd. Portland had over 90 consecutive nights of rioting, not peaceful protests, rioting. Seattle allowed an entire section of the city to declare itself an autonomous zone, a first in American history. Progressive governors, progressive mayors, progressive police chiefs run all of these cities and states. Ask any resident of Los Angeles or San Francisco about the rise in homelessness, and you'll get a litany of horror stories. Both cities, of course, have a long history of progressive mayors. How about keeping us healthy and safe? Surely the progressive states with their strict lockdowns did a better job saving lives from the coronavirus. Nope. Adjusted for population, as a resident of New York, New Jersey, or Illinois, you are 3, 4, or even 5 times more likely to die of the virus than if you lived in a red state like Florida, Texas, Georgia, Utah, or Arizona. Progressives and liberal Democrats may mean well. They certainly talk a lot about how much they care about the poor, minorities, and the working class. Yet somehow it's always the poor, minorities, and the working class who pay the price for their bad policies. That's why those who can move do move. Those who can't get stuck with the short end of the stick. Red state America is prospering. Blue state America is in meltdown. So where do you want to live? I'm Stephen Moore, economist at Freedom Works for Prager University.
Progressive politicians love to talk about raising the minimum wage. It makes them sound caring, compassionate, concerned. They're on the side of the worker standing against the greedy employer. The current call is for a national $15 an hour minimum wage, more than double the current federal rate of $7.25. A number of cities and states are already there, including New York, California, Washington, D.C., and Seattle. Others are considering it. The left casts the minimum wage debate as a war between employee and employer. But most business owners pay their workers as much as they can. Finding and keeping good people is the hardest part of any employer's job. I know. For 17 years, I ran CKE Restaurants, the parent company of Carl's Jr. and Hardee's. Our company and franchise restaurants employed over 75,000 people. But as with most retail businesses, our profit margins were razor thin. Based on my experience, if we adopt the national minimum wage of $15, here's what will happen. 1, a lot of people will lose their jobs or have their hours reduced. According to a 2014 Congressional Budget Office study, just a $10 minimum wage would cost 500,000 jobs as businesses terminate employees. Obviously, far more jobs would be lost at $15 an hour. To survive, employers would have to reduce hours, even for workers who manage to keep their jobs. That's a pay cut. 2, businesses will close, and the jobs they created will disappear. A recent report from researchers at the Harvard Business School found that each $1 increase in the minimum wage results in a 4 to 10% increase in the likelihood of restaurants closing. An over $7 an hour increase to $15 would be devastating, not only for restaurants, but for small businesses and their employees. 3, young people will lose that entry-level job opportunity. My first job was scooping ice cream at a Baskin-Robbins in Cleveland, Ohio in the 1960s. Now, it paid just $1 an hour, but it taught me valuable lessons like the importance of showing up on time, teamwork, and presenting a happy demeanor to customers. No one can get that better job until they have their first job. 4, the cost of all workers will have to go up. If you hire a dishwasher at $15 an hour, your cooks will be unhappy with their wages. You're going to have to pay everybody more, which increases labor costs across the board. That's more pressure on profits. Too much pressure and you're out of business. 5, fewer people will open businesses. $15 an hour is a very steep hill to climb. Would-be entrepreneurs will do the math on labor costs and realize it's just not worth the risk. This is a real cost to the economy that we can't measure. A company that never exists never employs anyone. 6, prices for everything will go up as businesses pass higher labor costs along to consumers. One of two things will happen. Either consumers won't pay the higher prices and businesses will lay off workers or close, or consumers will pay higher prices and have less money to spend elsewhere. Either way, the higher minimum wage will represent a drag on the overall economy. Now, this may sound like doom and gloom, but it's already a reality for many business owners and workers in the cities and states that are raising the minimum wage. In San Francisco, AQ, a 2012 James Beard Award finalist for the best new restaurant in America, saw rising labor costs drive its profit margins down from 8.5% in 2012 to 1.5% by 2015. So it shut the doors. Jeremy Marin's chain of Cuban restaurants in New York closed 2 locations because of minimum wage increases and has raised prices at the restaurants he's still operating. The minimum wage, he said, is going up too fast. We can't catch our breath. Kevin McNamee is a chiropractor in California. I'll be moving my 2 companies out of Los Angeles, he wrote in a letter to the New York Times. When the city compels me to pay employees $15 an hour, it comes out of my pocket. Last year, my employees made more than I did. Now, these stories are already all too common. Expect them to become more so as cities and states pile on the $15 minimum wage bandwagon. So, if a $15 minimum wage doesn't help workers and doesn't help employers, who exactly does it help? Well, maybe just the progressive politicians who manage to mislead voters into believing that it's the right thing to do. Sounding caring, compassionate, and concerned is all well and good, but having a job is better. I'm Andy Puzder for Prager University.
When you hear the words free enterprise or capitalism or free markets, what's the first thought that comes into your head? For just about everyone, it would have to do with making money. But there's another side to free enterprise that's actually more important. Free enterprise matters not just because of its unparalleled material benefits, but because of its unparalleled moral benefits. Now, this might seem counterintuitive to you, especially if you've been spending a lot of time hanging around college professors. For decades, so many of them have preached that free enterprise is mostly about selfishness and greed. But after the fall of the Soviet Union and communism was repudiated, even the left grudgingly acknowledged the utility of free enterprise, but only as a necessary evil. Sure, they said, free enterprise benefits us materially, but the cost isn't worth it. People become too materialistic. Corporations become too powerful. Profits are corrupting, and there's just too much material inequality. Is that a fair assessment? No, it isn't, and here's why. Free enterprise is not just materially fulfilling, it's a moral imperative. One big reason is that only free enterprise enables us to become truly happy, because it enables us to earn our success. Now, what do I mean by this? Earned success is the satisfaction and happiness that we derive from having dreams and working hard to achieve them. This is only possible in a system where rewards are based on earning them rather than having the right connections and where you have to please customers and not politicians. Think about the things in your life that make you happy. It's probably your personal relationships, your family, and maybe your job. In other words, the things that represent hard work and personal virtue and achievement. Sure, we all want nice things, but if they're just given to us and we don't earn them, they don't really make us happy. You've probably thought what you'd do if you won the lottery, right? We've all played that game. Maybe you say you'd buy a big house, a new wardrobe, or take a great trip around the world. Maybe you'd do it all. The truth is, according to studies from researchers at the University of Michigan, you're actually more likely to be less happy after you win than before you bought the ticket. People who win the lottery typically buy a bunch of stuff they don't want, get new friends, some even become alcoholics. This hardly makes for a great Powerball ad campaign, but it's the truth. Why is this? For the same reason that your parents probably always taught you that money doesn't buy happiness. Still, critics on the left tell us that if we only had more equal incomes, we'd be a happier society. That's just not true. Happiness is earned, not given by others. Look at entrepreneurs. People who own their own businesses rate themselves as happier than just about any other job category. And why? What's their secret? It's not as if they're working short hours or making lots of money. Neither of these things are the case. Entrepreneurs earn 20% less than government managers on average. Rather, it's because their businesses allow them to earn their own success. It's this success that makes them happy, and this is really only possible through free enterprise. The government giving us stuff we didn't earn doesn't make us happy, and it's really that simple. Now, this insight is hardly one that I came up with. In fact, no one in my field of social science can claim credit for it. It was America's founding fathers who first put together happiness and earned success. You probably remember that the Declaration of Independence talks about the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Think about those words, pursuit of happiness. Our founders didn't say that you have the right to be happy, only that you have the right to pursue your happiness. And that's what free enterprise does and why it matters. Only free enterprise lets us decide what makes us happy and then go do it. The pursuit of happiness that's at the root of America's moral promise can only happen if we have the opportunity to earn our success. Happiness is not about materialism or government redistribution of wealth. It's about defining our lives and our goals and achieving happiness on our own terms. That's the moral promise of free enterprise. I'm Arthur Brooks, president of the American Enterprise Institute for Prager University.
In 1965, President Lyndon Johnson famously declared a war on poverty. Half a century later, the poverty rate, the percentage of people the government declares to be living in poverty, has barely changed. Why? Are we not spending enough money? The federal government funds 126 separate anti-poverty programs. 72 of these provide benefits either directly or indirectly to individuals. The cost? $680 billion in 2013. Add in state and local government spending on poverty programs, another $280 billion, and the total comes to nearly $1 trillion. That's for 1 year. If just spending money was the solution, our poverty problem should be solved. But clearly it's not. We need a better answer. And that answer, upon a few moments of reflection, should be obvious. Work. Only 2.5% of Americans working full-time are, by government standards, considered poor. Given, then, that work is the road out of poverty, shouldn't we be doing everything we can to encourage people to get on that road? Of course we should. Unfortunately, however, we are doing just the opposite. Our welfare benefits are frequently so generous that they discourage people from working. We have created, perhaps with the best of intentions, what economists call a perverse incentive, in this case, against work. This is not to suggest that poor people are lazy. Most certainly aren't. But they also aren't stupid. In a recent study for the Cato Institute, we looked at what a typical family on welfare could receive in benefits and compared that to what that recipient would need to earn in wages to maintain the same income. Our study looked at a typical welfare family with 2 children under the age of 5. We assumed that this family receives benefits from the 7 most common welfare programs. Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, TANF, a straight cash program, Medicaid, food stamps, Women, Infants, and Children Nutrition Program, or WIC, public housing vouchers, utilities assistance, and the Commodity Supplemental Food Program, or CSFP, which provides staples such as cheese, milk, canned vegetables, and other basic dietary items. Of course, not every welfare recipient gets all these benefits, but some get benefits from even more programs. With 72 programs involved, there is a buffet of options. For example, if our hypothetical family had children older than 5, they wouldn't receive benefits from Women's, Infants, and Children's Program, WIC. Instead, they would get free school breakfasts and lunches. Our study found that the value of these benefits varied from a low of $16,984 in Mississippi to an astonishing high of $49,175 in Hawaii. And keep this in mind. Welfare benefits are not taxed while wages are. That means that in many states, welfare recipients would have to earn even more by working than they receive in benefits for not working in order to come out even. In fact, taking taxes into account, in 33 states, a welfare recipient would receive more income through benefits than a worker could from working full-time at a minimum wage job. In 13 states, a mother on welfare with 2 children would receive more in benefits than by earning $15 per hour at a job. And in the 8 most generous states, she could get more in benefits than by working at a $25 per hour job. And that's without having to get to a place of business at a specific time, having to work 8 hours, or deal with a boss and fellow employees. But don't people who receive many of these benefits have to be working in some capacity or at least actively searching for work? Not really. In 2009, work requirements, the centerpiece of the Republican Congress Clinton administration welfare reform bill of 1996, were severely eroded. Nationwide, fewer than 42% of recipients are participating in what are called work activities. In some states, such as Missouri and Massachusetts, fewer than 1 out of 5 welfare recipients are working. And that uses a very broad definition of work activity. Going to college can be considered work. Job training can be considered work. Even just looking for work can be considered work. Yet less than half of welfare recipients meet even these definitions. Many poor people are making what would seem to be a rational economic decision by not working. It's pretty simple. If welfare pays better than work, why choose to work? But in the long run, that tempting choice is a bad one, because it will end up keeping those in the welfare system trapped in poverty. Only working for wages, even minimum wages, or marrying someone who works, puts you on a path out of poverty. If we are serious about reducing welfare dependency and helping Americans climb out of poverty, we need to establish a clear policy preference for work over welfare. But our current welfare benefits are so generous that not working too often seems like a better deal. It is no wonder, then, that even after 50 years of trying, we are still losing the war on poverty. I'm Michael Tanner of the Cato Institute for Prager University.
Is our economy a machine, like an automobile, a train, or a power plant? One constantly hears phrases such as, the economy is overheating, or needs to cool off, or could use some stimulus. These aren't harmless metaphors. They epitomize how economists have taught us to see an economy, as something that can be manipulated, guided, or driven. And guess who does the driving? The government. The government is supposed to make sure that the economy hums along at an even speed, going neither too fast nor too slow. But the economy is not a machine. It is made up of people, and no one can control what billions of them are going to do. What gets overlooked, underplayed, or simply ignored is the extraordinary churn in the activities of a free market. New businesses open while others close constantly. In the U.S. during normal times, 500,000 or more jobs are created each week, while another 500,000 are cut. Entrepreneurs continually roll out new products and services, most of which flop. But those that succeed can greatly improve our quality of life. What government can and should do is to positively influence the environment in which this hum of activity takes place through sensible taxation, monetary policy, government spending, and regulation. And in almost all instances, the best prescription for economic health is less is more. Catastrophic mistakes by governments can poison the marketplace, as happened during the Great Depression in the 1930s, to a lesser extent in the 1970s, and then again in the panic of 2008-2009. The government's recent mistakes have been compounded by tax increases and an avalanche of anti-growth regulations from Obamacare, the Dodd-Frank Financial Services Bill, and all those Washington regulatory agencies, such as the FCC, the EPA, and the National Labor Relations Board. If you want to understand why the American economy has been growing at the anemic pace of 1% to 2% a year, look no further. Again, the idea of an economy that purrs along like a well-oiled machine hurts, not enhances wealth creation, because invariably it leads to growth-retarding government intervention. Which brings us to bubbles. Shouldn't the government, the argument goes, at least try to stop them from happening? Well, it depends. Those caused by misguided government policies like the housing bubble of the mid-2000s? Yes. Those caused by the free market? No. Bubbles have a bad name. but not all of them are created equal. There are healthy ones and unhealthy ones. The good kind develops when a lot of people simultaneously recognize a great opportunity. Computers are an excellent example. During the early 1980s, there was a boom in personal computers, followed by a severe shakeout, when companies such as Atari and Commodore bit the dust. In the late 1990s, a number of companies recognized the importance of search engines. Google emerged supreme, with Microsoft and others relegated to fractional market shares. More recently, mobile phones went through its own shakeout, with a dozen different brands competing for market share. Once, Nokia was king, but now the Apple iPhone and Samsung dominate. Good bubbles are a sign of a vibrant and innovative economy. The excesses are ultimately squeezed out, and capital is redeployed to more promising opportunities. But bubbles artificially created by government policies, such as the housing bubble, are disastrous. The housing crisis was largely created by government policies, including pushing banks into giving mortgages to people who could not really afford them. When large numbers of those borrowers stopped making their payments, the market crashed and everyone got hurt by unnecessary government meddling. Finally, there are business cycles. Shouldn't the government smooth those out? Economists have puzzled over business cycles, the ups and downs of an economy, for more than 200 years. Most have treated the phenomenon like an illness, something to be cured, instead of what it is, the ebb and flow of the free market, where what people might want is created and what people don't want is destroyed. Trying to arrest this free market process of creative destruction, as it is known, inevitably leads to stagnation. That is, little or no economic growth. For current examples, see Japan and most of Europe. Here's a rule. The more a government tightens its grip, the less an economy grows. That's because an economy is not a machine and government can't force it to act like one. So, let's free the free market. That is and always has been the surest path to prosperity. I'm Steve Forbes for Prager University.